theme for the BMS Harvest project is caring for the stranger. According to the UN, there's about 43.7 million refugees across the world outside the border of their own country, the country where they were born. That's in addition to a probably greater number who are displaced internally. Think of the vast numbers in terms of millions in places like Ukraine and Sudan. So I fear that the internally displaced in the world is higher than the 43 million externally displaced. So how do countries cope? How do countries respond in these situations of need? A problem that's not going to go away. A problem that's been there over the centuries. It's not if it happens, it's how we care for others. Does the Bible have anything to say on this subject? It does. There are many passages. We've seen the story of Ruth and all that happened there, about how that movement between two countries and cultures and backgrounds, and how people's acts of kindness were a blessing both in Moab and in Bethlehem. In the book of Genesis, it speaks about the gift of hospitality in Genesis chapter 18. It's a story from the time of Abraham and Sarah. They're living near a place called Mamre, where they pitched their tents. And this day, unexpectedly, 3 men appear before them. And Abram looked up and saw them standing nearby. And he went to meet them and said, if I found favor in your eyes, don't pass by. Just come and be refreshed with some water. Have a wash and a rest, and we'll make you a meal. And he and Sarai, his wife, prepared a meal for them. In life, we cannot choose our relatives, but we can choose our friends and the people we assist. That's a choice and an opportunity. Abram was called the friend of God. It's quite an extraordinary thing. In a number of passages, one of the things that I'm sure God took delight in was his willingness for hospitality and the generosity to these guests and others. It was part of the culture of leisurely hospitality, of greeting him and welcoming. Hebrews 13:2 that says, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some people have entertained angels without knowing it. I think this is a reference back to the passage in Genesis. Now that's not your motivation of mine for being kind to people in need, just in case they're angels. But this model of generosity, it was unreserved. They welcomed the people that came. The meal that was provided was a generous meal. The proportions, we see the figures, was certainly a very large meal. There'd probably be some over for others or for another day as well. But it's that picture of generous hospitality. It's a model and a pattern that we see elsewhere in the Bible as well. Jesus, at the Last Supper, you remember how he washed the disciples' feet. In John 13, a task normally reserved for a lowly servant. And his challenge in the course of that evening to say to his followers, as my Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. The Old Testament laid down clear principles for our treatment of incomers. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were not the only enslaved people who left at that time. Exodus 12, it says the Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkah through about 600,000 men on foot, and also women and children. Many other people went with them, and then reference to the animals too. No surprise they took the chance to gain their freedom. Absolutely the right thing to do. But there was that continued expectation that people from other lands would be there in the midst of Israel. In Exodus chapter 12, the guidance of Passover has guidance for a foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover with you. It goes on to say the same law applies both to the native born and the foreigner residing among you. And the general principles given in the book of Exodus 22 verse 21, for example. Do not ill-treat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Exodus 23, do not oppress a foreigner, for you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners because you were foreigners in Egypt. But the principle in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 23, speaks about how 6 days you do your work and on the seventh do not work. Why? So that your ox and your donkey may rest. That's the animals used for work, that the animals got treated well. And so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. It was for everyone. That there's care, that they had time to rest and be refreshed. It wasn't just for those who had the privilege to do so. It's that pattern of life. And the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verses 33 and 34, when a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not ill-treat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourselves, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Very powerful and challenging words. So applicable today as then. But that's not new. That's 3,000 years ago and beyond that. That challenge from God as to how we treat people well. And there's the example in the New Testament, the passage that Eve read to us, of hospitality. The Mediterranean Sea was a very busy thoroughfare 2,000 years ago. Now, during the reign of Augustus Caesar, it was an incredibly peaceful time, and there was a huge road building project to give good roads across the empire. And people, if they had the money and the time, which most people didn't, but if you did, people could travel at will, but you didn't have cars, you were walking. And taking a ship could cut across the Mediterranean a lot quicker than walking all the way around. But only certain times of year was it safe to travel. If you got too late in the autumn, the storms could drive the ships ashore, or shipwrecks, as would happen here. And Acts 27 tells the story of what happened to this ship in which Paul and Luke and others were shipwrecked. 276 people were on that boat. And it lands in the shallow water off the coast of Malta. How did the people of Malta treat these unexpected guests that arrived? There's a generosity of spirit and a practical willingness to help. We see the bonfire on the beach in verses 1 to 6. Once safely on the shore, we found that the island was called Malta. They hadn't got a clue where they were because the ship had been in the midst of the storm for so long. They were probably really seasick as well and just so glad to be on firm ground. It says the islanders showed us unusual kindness. They went beyond what we could have expected. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. No, this wasn't the west coast of Scotland in winter. It was in Malta. And they welcomed the people. Strangers soaked to the skin with what few possessions they had, surviving the loss of the boat. And 276 is a lot of people. It's not one person to give us a bed for the night. That's a lot of people over probably months before you could get another ship to go once spring was around again. Serving others in Jesus' name need not be complicated. Most of the time it can be common courtesies, encouraging words, or as here acts of kindness. And my goodness, in our world, how we need more kindness. On social media, how we need more kindness. Just seeing the posts and people's comments about the assassination in America. It's staggering what some people choose to post. And God's message is simple. We can be kind. We can do better than that. These Maltese people had no idea whether the strangers were good people or bad. They assumed because it was a Roman transport ship that there were people being taken for court cases, which was correct. They assumed that some were probably guilty of very serious offences like murder. Hence the comment about Paul when he had the snake on his arm. Yet they still provided that hospitality for the people, even though they thought some might not have been the best of people. There was no end date for the departure of their guests. It was at least weeks or months, most likely from the autumn to the following spring, when a new boat was arranged to transport them to their destination in Rome. Working with refugees and asylum seekers is a lengthy project that has no clear end date. When we witness a continually increasing number of millions of people moving around the world, it's a challenge that humanity will need to address for years to come. And there's the healing in the hotel. The estate, they belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. Don't know whether all 276 went to see him, or whether it was just a few. But interestingly, those who were doing the blessing through caring for those who come to the island were also blessed in the process. In this case, it was healings for Publius' father and some other people. When we give, we also receive blessings in different ways. And as we honour God by giving generously to others, by being hospitable, by welcoming into our homes for meals or going out for cups of coffee or in other ways engaging with others, we are blessed as we serve and others serve us. God in his sovereignty allowed that situation to happen on Malta. But what a good witness these people had by their lives in welcoming the stranger. That was genuine. It was wholehearted. The challenge to us today is to be welcoming to those in need, to those whose paths cross ours. In a country where the rhetoric against new people who come here is becoming an increasing concern, as followers of Jesus, we can continue to model a better way. And I thank God for the great work that's been done through this church and others and in our community, and care for Ukrainians and others in our city, because that's the Jesus way. So, questions for reflection. Do you think we have a responsibility to care for the stranger? I'm sure that's an easy one to answer. We can give financially to the BMS Harvest Appeal. Is there any other way God's prompting us to help at this time?